Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Elizabethans review and recap series. In this episode, we'll be exploring the final topic of the Elizabethan module, the wider world. We will focus on expansion, imperial ambition, attempted colonies, and the growing trade with the East. So let's start by looking at why there was expansion. In the Middle Ages, travel by sea was quite rare, so despite it being much quicker, long distances were often travelled by land instead because it's much safer. In the 15th century, though, we start to see the first long sea voyages, and this is largely down to the fact that there's new navigational devices, such as the compass and faster, more manoeuvrable ships, so ships that are quicker and easier to control. We've also got the invention of guns for protection, so this means the men going on these trips are going to be safer. Elizabeth encourages these voyages because it could mean a more reliable source of luxury goods, and it could lead to finding gold and fame. England's an island, so a powerful navy is going to be a really good defence. English sailors, as a result, become much better at sailing and fighting at sea. This didn't just improve trade and exploration, it's also going to be vital in defeating the attack by the Spanish in 1588, the Spanish Armada. By the end of Elizabeth's reign, England's actually one of the greatest sea powers in the world. So, looking to expand trade is going to be really important for Elizabeth because in the 1550s the cloth trade collapses. So this means they lose lots of their income and trade with countries like the Netherlands. This means they're going to seek out new markets for their goods and new goods to sell. New trade companies are formed. I'll talk about this more on the last slide of this video, but the Muscovy Company set up in 1555 and they trade in furs and timber. We've got the Eastland Company in 1581 trading timber and tar. The Levant Company in 1581 dyes, dried fruit, wine and silk, and then lastly the East India Company in 1600 with silk, cotton, tea and spices. So Spain themselves have actually developed a really large empire, and this meant that Elizabeth was really keen to get some overseas territory for herself. She's seen how much gold they managed to obtain and the resources from these countries, particularly they were focusing on Central and South America. So Elizabeth then has her men focus on North America to try and rival them and obtain new undiscovered lands. There's going to be several attempts to establish overseas colonies during Elizabeth's reign. None of them are actually successful. We will look at one of the notable attempts, which is Roanoke, on one of the further slides. So despite them not being successful, they do help pave the way for the British Empire later on. So she's also going to want to weaken Spain, so ongoing rivalry and wars with Spain. So English adventurers, notably Sir Francis Drake, were devout Protestants. They loathe the Spanish because they're Catholic, and what they've been doing is stealing lots of gold and attacking their colonies. This is actually supported by Elizabeth because she wants to weaken her rival, and it also means that she can get a share of some of that wealth. So Elizabeth wants to extend England's influence across the globe, and we call this Imperial Ambition. So building what we've said previously, there's several reasons why Elizabeth wants to expand overseas. So we've said before, trade, weakening Spain, but also because she wants to establish colonies to help spread the word of God. So as a Protestant monarch, she thinks it's important to make sure what she believes is the true faith is then spread in the New World. She also wants these new colonies to be bases of attack for the Spanish ships. She also wants to seek a global reputation. So let's start by looking at John Dee. So he was an advisor to the Queen, and he presents a plan to shift the balance of power from Spain to England in 1577. So Spain had focused on Central and South America. So what he proposes Elizabeth do is actually focus on the Far East, the East Indies, and then to actually set up colonies in North America. So deliberately choosing areas in which Spain haven't yet established colonies. He comes up with the concept of the British Empire, and he really pushes that idea that England can be a great influence too, just like Spain. So John Hawkins is Sir Francis Drake's cousin. He's a navigator and he's also actually a slave trader. So he's one of the first Englishmen to actually trade in African men. So he made 3 voyages during the 1560s. He captured Africans and sold them into slavery in Spanish settlements in Central America. He also designed and built ships for the Navy. He developed a new type of fighting galleon, which is faster, lighter and better, able to withstand harsh conditions, and this is actually one of the ones used in the Spanish Armada. So more famously though is his cousin, Sir Francis Drake, and he's the first Englishman, along with John Hawkins, to circumnavigate the globe. And as a result of this, they both become national heroes. So circumnavigation is where you sail around the width of the world, so the width of the globe, and very, very dangerous. Not many people made it, and they're the first Englishmen to successfully do that journey. Sir Francis Drake is a sea captain, he's a privateer, and he's also a naval officer. So he plays a really key role in the Spanish Armada, which we looked at in one of the previous videos. The Spanish call him El Drake then, which means the dragon. They really don't like him because he pillages lots of their gold in the New World. He deliberately sets fire to their ships. So he's not a fan. He doesn't have many fans above the Spanish. Okay, Elizabeth though is really fond of him because of the fact that he's brought lots of success to England's naval gains, but also he plays a big part in bringing wealth to England. So let's look at some of the examples. So in November 1577, he leaves Plymouth with 5 ships and 170 men. He plunders then Spanish and Portuguese ships off the west coast of Africa, and he takes lots of their gold and the items that they've managed to established on the way. In summer 1578, he enters the Straits of Magellan and he claims several islands for the Queen, and he's the first Englishman into the Pacific Sea. In the winter of 1578, he raids Chile and Peru. He attacks Spanish treasure ships and he sees silver worth £20,000. So in today's money, that kind of equates to about 30 million. So we're talking really, really high stakes money here. In June 1579, he lands in California and he calls it New Albion for Elizabeth. So although he doesn't colonise the area, he claims the land in name. September 1579, he returns to England with his pillaged treasures for Elizabeth, and he also obviously keeps the share for himself. Elizabeth is really happy because the money that he presents to her is more than a whole annual income. So she can see the benefits of having men like Sir Francis Drake particularly pillaging Spanish ships, and she also becomes very aware of the gold and the silver and the resources available in the New World. April 1581, as a result of all of his actions for England, he is knighted by the Queen, and he's actually knighted on board his ship, the Golden Hind, in 1581. So let's look at the attempted colonies. A man called Humphrey Gilbert, who is an English Protestant and therefore hates the Spanish, he attempted to start a colony in Newfoundland. He wanted to search for sea routes that went round the top of North America, which would then provide England with a trade route to China, which bypassed any route that existed that meant they would have to have contact with Spain. He first attempted this in 1579, but it was a disaster. Only his half-brother, Walter Raleigh, made it across the Atlantic. Gilbert's second voyage then in June 1583 is successful, and he does claim the area that we call Newfoundland. However, he does not establish a colony as the land is barren, cold and there's not much food. So a colony would mean Englishmen living on that land and fully occupying it. On the way back, one of the ships are wrecked and it kills 80, and Gilbert actually drowns on return. So it isn't a success, unfortunately. Walter Raleigh, however, does have a little bit more of a success. Walter Raleigh then hoped America would be his gateway to the riches of Asia. He also wanted to base North America, use it as a base for attacks on the Spanish. He got a charter from Elizabeth to colonise the land in America on the condition that Elizabeth would receive 1/5 of all of the gold or silver he found. In April 1584, he sent 2 of his friends on a vessel to North America. Their purpose then was to try and find a suitable location for a colony. They reached an island called Roanoke, where they made contact with the local Algonquian people. Walter Raleigh believed that this was a good place to establish an English colony. He names this area Virginia, which still exists today, after the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. A man called Richard Hakluyt then wrote a pamphlet outlining benefits of colonising America, talking about the potential to get new goods, but also to do missionary work, so going back to the idea of spreading the word of God, but also obviously to attack the Spanish. So let's look a bit more at Roanoke then. So Walter Raleigh, because he's a favourite of the Queen, she doesn't want him to go on the voyage, so he himself doesn't actually sail over. Instead, he sends 2 men, Richard Grenville and Ralph Lane, over with 600 sailors to colonise Roanoke. The journey is really treacherous, and they actually lose lots of men on the voyage over there. Grenville ends up splitting from the group. When they arrive in July 1585, the fleet got stuck in sandbanks, they lost lots of supplies, and they're reliant and dependent on the local indigenous populations, the tribes there, to actually feed them and to look after them. Luckily for them, when they arrive in 1585, they're relatively friendly with them and willing to support them. Grenville then returns to England allegedly for supplies. However, he never returns. Lane stays there as governor with 107 men. So that demonstrates how many men they had already lost. They started with 600. The Algonquian people grew very wary of the English, however. Lane preempts that there's going to be an attack by them, so he actually beats them to it and he launches an attack first. So he actually kills the indigenous people there, which causes tension. Drake then has to go and rescue the colonists in June 1586 and bring most of those men back. Walter Raleigh, however, sends another group of colonists over for a third attempt. The governor, John White, he returns to England to get more supplies. He leaves his daughter and his grandchild there. However, when he returns to Roanoke in 1590, the colony has completely vanished, and this actually remains a bit of a mystery today. There is no sign of the colony. The buildings that they had built weren't there anymore. There's lots of different theories to what could have happened to them. One of them is that the indigenous people there sought revenge and killed them. Another one is that it's actually the Spanish. There's lots of different theories. We unfortunately will never actually know the truth behind it. But this means that the colonisation attempt was unsuccessful, so it's a failure. However, where we can put a positive spin on this then is there's actually much learned for future colonies. So Harriet and White's books about colonisation informs later attempts in Jamestown in 1607. So that is not in Elizabeth's reign. So unfortunately, Elizabeth doesn't set up any British colonies. However, the work that the men did during her reign, like Walter Raleigh, like John White, for example, does mean later on under James I, they do have some successes. And finally, let's have a look at trade with the East. So wealthy Elizabethans want goods from India and China, so things like silk, cotton, jewels, nutmeg, cinnamon, clothes. These are luxury items that are hard to come by or simply not grown in England. And because of this, they want these items because they're luxuries and they can show off their wealth and status. We know in the Elizabethan period, the wealthy are becoming even richer, and it's really important for them to demonstrate their status by having access to these new resources. The Spanish-Portuguese War then in 1580 leads to English merchants creating the Turkey Company in 1581. So it grants them monopoly, which is control, to trade in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is going to bring them even more opportunities to establish links with the East. So Ralph Fitch then, he sets up links with the Mughal Empire. So Turkey Company sends Fitch to India and Southeast Asia and China to research trade. He carries letters from Queen Elizabeth to the Mughal and Chinese emperors with the intent of trying to set up these links. He sets off in March 1583 with 4 men. All of them stay behind in various locations in Southeast Asia and China, and they eventually return in 1591. So they spend many years there conducting research, and they write about the people, the customs, the goods, and they learn a lot about the wealth and the trade of India, China, and the Spice Islands, and all of these things would have seemed so foreign and strange and very enchanting to English people who've never come across this before. You've got to remember as well, India, China and the Spice Islands, their empires are really established and they've got lots of wealth and knowledge and resources that simply England don't have. So they're going to be really keen to establish trade links with them because it will bring lots of new opportunities and goods to England. So the merchants in England are really interested in setting up trade, but what Ralph Fitch actually does, he talks about his worries as well. He particularly thinks the Dutch might actually beat him to it and then exploit the East. Unfortunately, they don't manage to actually set up any trade links, but they do build the foundations that later mean they can be more successful at the end of the Elizabethan period and in years to come. So we do see the establishment of the East India Company around 1600, which is obviously in the last final few years of Elizabeth's reign. And in April 1601, a man called John Lancaster is given command of the East India Company and the First Fleet. So he travels to Java and he goes to set up his first trading post in 1602. The English ships then begin to bring home spices like Portuguese and the Dutch have done previously. So this is going to make Elizabeth very happy because it's now new resources are being brought into England. Lancaster's voyage then in 1601 and 1603 is a really important moment in British history because we now see the establishment of trade with the East, and John Dee's vision of the British Empire is finally starting to begin. So the idea that England have finally managed to outreach into Asia and actually make more influence across the world. 200 years later, the East India Company is the biggest trading company in the world. So it might be a name that you've heard before because it does continue to run for many, many years and it's still around today. Although that isn't in Elizabeth's reign, it does demonstrate the work that they did and how that allowed the successes to happen later on. So to summarise then, so trade with the East, mainly research based in Elizabeth's reign, but we do see the establishment of the East India Company. John Lancaster has the most success because he does manage to establish those links.